It was just another quiet Sunday evening in Frederick, Colorado, or so it seemed. Sean and Watts had just returned home from a business trip to Arizona. A friend dropped her off around 1:48 a.m. on August 13th, 2018. Ring doorbell footage shows her walking up to the door, suitcase in hand. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Before we dive in, if you care about stories like this, support the channel by liking this video, sharing it with someone who follows true crime, and subscribing for other true crime stories. Hit the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Just hours later, Sean and 15 weeks pregnant with a baby boy, was reported missing, along with her 2 daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste. Her friend, Nicole Atkinson, grew worried when Sean missed a doctor's appointment and wouldn't return calls or texts. She went straight to the Watts house and knocked. No answer. Chris Watts, Shanann's husband, claimed he didn't know where they were. He seemed calm. Too calm. Police were called. Bodycam footage from that first welfare check shows Chris answering the door casually, chatting with officers, even inviting them inside. He looked worried on the surface, but something felt off. He mentioned Sean and had gone to a friend's house after a supposed emotional conversation they had that morning. Yet her car, purse, phone, and medications were all still there. The house was too quiet. No signs of struggle, but also no sign of Sean or the girls. Chris began doing interviews with the media the same day, pleading for their safe return. If you're out there, just come back. If somebody has her, just bring her back, he said into the camera, arms crossed tightly over his chest. But behind the scenes, the police were already seeing cracks in his story. His cell phone data didn't match his claims. His body language was rehearsed, and the surveillance footage from neighbors didn't support his version of events. Chris insisted he'd left for work around 5:15 a.m. that morning, but his truck, parked outside, told a different story. A neighbor's camera showed him backing up into the driveway, something he never normally did. He stayed there for over 45 minutes before leaving. What was he doing? And why did it seem like he was hiding something in plain sight? Before we dive deeper into the case, the timeline, and the chilling confession that shook the nation, because what comes next is unthinkable. What do you think happened in those early morning hours before Chris left for work? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The search for Sean and Bella and Celeste had barely begun when the first thread started to unravel. Not from police work, but from a neighbor who had been quietly watching. The day Sean was reported missing, police entered the Watts home to conduct a welfare check. Chris played the role of a concerned husband, leading officers from room to room, casually pointing out that nothing seemed out of place. But while Chris was walking through the motions, a neighbor named Nathaniel Nate Trinastick was watching from across the street, and he was uneasy. Nate had security cameras on his home that faced the Watts driveway. Police asked if they could review the footage. Nate invited them in. What they saw shook them. At 5:17 a.m., Chris's truck, a large white pickup, backed up into the driveway, tail first. He kept it parked there for nearly 45 minutes. It wasn't normal. Chris never backed in. He usually parked forward. That day, however, it was like he needed privacy or cover. On camera, you could see Chris walking back and forth between the garage and the truck, moving back and forth, loading something, but the footage had blind spots. Enough to raise suspicion, not enough to prove anything. When Chris left the neighbor's home after watching the video, Nate turned to the officers and said what everyone was thinking. He's not acting right. He's fidgety. He's never like that. Investigators were listening now. Meanwhile, back at the house, Chris gave a TV interview standing in front of his home, the same home where just hours earlier, something unthinkable may have happened. He wrapped his arms around himself as if rehearsing emotion. He said, "Sean and Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. If someone has them, please bring them back safe." His voice trembled, his face twitched, but the words, they didn't sound like grief. They sounded like performance. And then, the interview stopped. Chris stopped talking to the press. And the police, now suspicious, started looking closer into his phone, his movements, and most importantly, his past week. because buried in the digital trail was a secret Chris thought he had hidden well. He was cheating on Sean and the woman he was seeing had no idea his wife was pregnant. Why do you think Chris backed his truck in that morning and stayed parked for 45 minutes? What do you believe he was loading? In the final weeks before her death, Sean and Watts was starting to see the cracks. She had taken Bella and Celeste to North Carolina for a 6-week summer visit with her parents. Chris was scheduled to join them later, but when he arrived, he was cold, distant, and barely affectionate. Sean noticed it immediately. Her husband, once attentive and doting, was now avoiding her. He barely touched her. He barely looked at her. And when she tried to talk to him, he pulled further away. Sean began texting friends in frustration. "He's just not the same," she wrote. "He doesn't touch me anymore. He doesn't kiss me." Her friend Cassandra Lane later shared some of those messages with police. Sean was scared. She was 15 weeks pregnant and feared her husband was falling out of love with her. Or worse, that he had found someone else. She wasn't wrong. While Sean was in North Carolina, Chris was back in Colorado starting an affair with a coworker named Nicole Kessinger, a woman who had no idea Chris was still married, let alone expecting a baby. He told her he was separated. He told her he was at the end of his marriage. But what he didn't tell her was that Sean had no clue. On July 30th, 2018, just 2 weeks before the murders, Sean wrote Chris a long, emotional letter. She said she was feeling unwanted, unloved. "I miss your hands on me," she wrote. "I miss holding you. I miss smelling you. I miss eating dinner with you, laughing with you. I love you and I'm trying to fight for our marriage." She ended the message with a plea. "I just want to feel cherished." Chris never replied. While Sean was writing letters to save their marriage, Chris was deleting texts, hiding photos, and spending nights with Nicole. The phone data later revealed he was telling Nicole he loved her, all while Sean was fighting to keep her family together. But Sean wasn't blind. During that final trip to North Carolina, she began to confide in close friends. She told them Chris had stopped calling the girls. He wasn't acting like a husband or a father. And during one fight over the phone, Chris told Sean he didn't want the baby. That crushed her. This was supposed to be their fresh start, their baby boy, Nico. When Sean returned to Colorado, she sensed the truth. She told a friend, "If anything happens to me, look at Chris." That was just 3 days before she vanished. Do you think Chris had already made up his mind before Sean returned home? Or was there still a chance to save the marriage? While Sean was texting friends about saving her marriage, Chris Watts was busy building a new one. In secret, he met Nicole Kessinger in June 2018 at Anadarko Petroleum, where they both worked. First, it was just small talk in the break room, but things escalated quickly. Within weeks, they were texting constantly, sneaking off during work hours, and spending nights together while Sean and the girls were out of town. Chris told Nicole he was separated. He said he and Sean were finalizing a divorce. He even showed her photos of his daughters, calling them his past, while promising Nicole a fresh start and future. What Nicole didn't know was that Sean was still very much in the picture. Pregnant, living in the same house, and trying desperately to repair the cracks in their marriage. As their relationship deepened, Chris's lies grew bolder. He deleted messages from his phone, used secret calculator apps to hide photos, and spent money on dates with Nicole while telling Sean they were broke. He even lied to Sean about work events so he could sneak away for romantic weekends. One receipt later found by detectives showed Chris spent over $60 on dinner at the Lazy Dog restaurant. But he told Sean he was eating at home with coworkers. That same night, she texted him a sonogram photo of their baby. He didn't reply. As Sean grew more desperate to reconnect, Chris grew colder. On August 8th, 5 days before the murders, he gave her a chilling response when she asked if he was still in love. "I don't know." That was the moment she knew something was terribly wrong. Meanwhile, Nicole noticed a shift too. She told investigators later that Chris began acting off, sometimes warm, sometimes distant. He told her he was finalizing his divorce by August 13th, the same day Sean would be dead. As investigators would later discover, Chris had been researching ways to prepare for a new life. He looked up how to delete messages, vacation plans for two, and even Google searched when to say I love you. But the one thing he never searched for was how to save his family. If you're following this heartbreaking story, support the channel with a like, share this with someone who follows true crime, and subscribe for the full story. Hit the notification bell, more chilling details are coming, and you won't want to miss them. August 12, 2018. Sean and Watts boarded a late flight back to Colorado after a weekend business trip in Arizona. She was exhausted but hopeful. She had spoken with friends during the trip about trying to reconnect with Chris, to sit down, talk, and fix their marriage before it was too late. But she didn't know he'd already made up his mind. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera captured her arrival home at 1:48 a.m. on August 13th. She walked to the door quietly, carrying her suitcase, her handbag, and the weight of everything that had gone unsaid between her and her husband. It was the last time she was seen alive. Inside the house, the girls, Bella and Celeste, were likely asleep. Sean had no idea that earlier that evening, while she was on her flight, Chris had been texting with Nicole Kessinger, telling her he was excited to finally have his freedom. What happened next behind closed doors is still partially a mystery. But based on Chris's later confession, Sean went upstairs, undressed, and climbed into bed. She may have sensed something was off. Maybe Chris wasn't asleep. Maybe he was waiting. At around 4 a.m., according to his own words, Chris got out of bed, woke Sean up, and told her their marriage was over. An argument followed. Sean, confused and hurt, allegedly told him he'd never see the kids again. Then, according to Chris, in a chilling moment of rage, he strangled her to death in their bed. He said she didn't scream. He claimed it was quick. But investigators would later question everything about that story. As the sun rose over Frederick, Chris began preparing for his day. He wrapped Shanann's body in a sheet. He carried her downstairs and loaded her into the back of his work truck. Then he turned toward the bedrooms of Bella and Celeste. The girls were still alive. He told them their mom was sick and loaded them into the truck alongside their mother's body, a fact that would later haunt investigators, prosecutors, and everyone who watched the case unfold. The three of them, a father, his daughters, and the body of their mother, drove off toward a remote oil field where Chris worked. It was called Survey 319. It was an ordinary morning in suburban Colorado. But inside that truck was the beginning of something horrific. What do you think went through Shanann's mind when Chris woke her up? Do you believe his version of what happened is the full truth? The drive to the oil field was over 45 minutes. In the back seat of Chris Watts' truck sat 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste, quiet, confused, and clutching their blankets. Next to them, wrapped in a sheet, was the body of their mother, Sean. Chris later told investigators that Bella asked him during the ride, "What's wrong with Mommy?" He lied. He told her Sean wasn't feeling well. But the girls weren't oblivious. They knew something was wrong. Celeste, affectionately called Cece, dozed off and on during the ride. Bella stayed awake, watching, listening, maybe trying to understand why her mom wasn't moving. They arrived at Survey 319, a remote oil site where Chris worked as an operator for Anadarko Petroleum. It was early morning, and the sun hadn't fully risen. No one else was there. No witnesses. Just open land, giant tanks, and silence. Chris took Shanann's body out of the truck first. According to his confession, he buried her in a shallow grave near the site. But that wasn't the end. He still had the girls awake, alive, and watching. He turned to Celeste. He smothered her with one of their own blankets, while Bella sat nearby. Chris claimed it was quick, that she didn't fight. But then came Bella. According to the polygraph interview and what investigators were later told, Bella struggled. She fought. She kicked. She begged. She screamed, "Daddy, no!" Those two words would later break the hearts of everyone who heard them. The autopsy later showed injuries inside her mouth, suggesting she had bitten her tongue while struggling. She knew what was happening. She knew her father, the man who was supposed to protect her, was the one taking her last breath. When it was over, Chris carried her body and her sisters up the steps of the oil tanks. He opened the hatch and forced each of their small bodies into separate tanks filled with crude oil. Bella and Celeste were gone, and Chris, covered in sweat, oil, and silence, drove back home as if nothing had happened. By 7 a.m., he was texting coworkers, arranging his day, and pretending to be concerned about his missing family. But the truth was already written, in the dirt, in the oil, and in the hollow absence of 3 innocent lives. Why do you think Chris spared the girls for that long, only to kill them after? Do you think they knew what was coming? Let's talk in the comments. By the time Chris Watts returned home from the oil site, his wife and daughters were dead. He walked into the house, took a shower, washed his work clothes, and began what would become one of the most cold-blooded performances in true crime history, pretending to be the worried husband and father. At 8 a.m., Chris texted Shanann's phone. "Where are you?" He knew she'd never respond. By 12:10 p.m., Shanann's friend Nicole Atkinson had grown deeply concerned. Shanann missed her 10 a.m. OBGYN appointment and wasn't returning texts or calls. Nicole drove to the house, knocked on the door, and saw Shanann's car parked in the garage. Her shoes were inside, her purse, her keys, her medication, but no Shanann, no girls. Nicole called the police. At 1:40 p.m., Officer Scott Coonrod arrived for a welfare check. Body cam footage from that moment would later go viral, capturing Chris answering the door, shirtless, calm, and seemingly unconcerned. He let the officer and Nicole into the house and began making casual observations. Her phone's still here. Her purse too. That's strange. Maybe she went to a friend's house? To those watching, Chris looked too relaxed. He paced. He texted. He cracked awkward smiles. His tone never matched the situation. Officer Coonrod quickly noticed that Shanann's phone had been left behind, unlocked, with unread texts and missed calls. Her wedding ring was still on the nightstand, and yet Chris seemed to offer no urgency. When asked about the morning, he claimed Shanann and had told him she was taking the girls to a friend's house after an emotional conversation. But when pressed, Chris couldn't remember basic details, like the friend's name. Later that evening, Chris granted a local news interview on his front lawn. With crossed arms and rehearsed grief, he pleaded, "Shanann and Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. If somebody has them, please bring them back." But behind the scenes, investigators were already seeing the cracks. His cell phone records weren't matching. His story was inconsistent. And most of all, there was no sign that Shanann ever left the house alive. The world saw a grieving father. Detectives saw something else. Do you think Chris agreed to the TV interview to seem innocent? Or by August 14th, just one day after Shanann and the girls were reported missing, detectives knew something wasn't right. Chris Watts was being watched closely. His demeanor was too calm, his story too rehearsed. Surveillance footage didn't support his claims, and digital data was beginning to tell a much darker story. Investigators invited him to the Frederick Police Department for a formal interview. He agreed without hesitation. He thought he could lie his way through it. But the room he walked into was different. Dimly lit, quiet, no cameras in his face, no reporters, just Detective Tammy Lee, calm, composed, and precise, and Special Agent Graham Coder from the FBI. They asked Chris to recount everything from the morning Shanann and disappeared. He repeated the same story. They had an emotional conversation. She said she was taking the girls to a friend's house. He left for work. That was it. But his body language was off. He couldn't make eye contact. His arms were crossed, fingers twitching, voice flat. Then came the next step, a polygraph. Detective Lee looked him in the eye and said, "This is your chance to clear your name. If you had nothing to do with their disappearance, the test will show that." Chris agreed, but the results didn't lie. The polygraph showed massive deception. Detective Lee returned to the room with a chilling line. "Chris, it's clear you're not telling us the truth." He paused. His shoulders dropped. And then the first major shift happened. Chris asked to speak to his father, Ronnie Watts. He broke down. But even then, he didn't tell the full truth. Instead, he offered a new lie. He claimed that after telling Sean and he wanted a separation, she strangled the girls, and in a moment of rage, he killed her. A story with no evidence. A desperate attempt to shift blame. Detectives didn't buy it. No one did. But now, Chris had finally admitted Sean and was dead, and that he had disposed of her body. That was enough for police to arrest him. On August 15th, Chris Watts was taken into custody for the murders of Sean and Bella and Celeste. But the full truth was still buried. In oil, in lies, and in a father's broken story. What do you think Chris hoped to gain by blaming Sean and why do you think he confessed, but only partially? Let's discuss. If you've made it this far, thank you for following this heartbreaking case. Please support the channel by liking this video, sharing it with someone who follows true crime, subscribing for the rest of the story, and hit the notification bell. More shocking details are still to come. On August 16, 2018, 2 days after his arrest, Chris Watts finally gave investigators what they had been waiting for. A location. He told them where to find Sean and Bella and Celeste. That morning, a search team was dispatched to Serva 319, the remote Anadarko petroleum site Chris had visited the morning of the murders. It was the same oil field where he claimed to be working while pretending to search for his missing family. Now it would become a crime scene. The area was eerily quiet. Flat fields. Oil tanks towering against a blue Colorado sky. The only sound was the buzz of investigators moving with grim focus. The air was heavy not with oil but with dread. First, they found a shallow grave. Inside was Sean and, still wrapped in a sheet, barely buried beneath the dirt. Her body was intact but showed bruising consistent with strangulation. Her unborn son, Nico, was still in her womb. Nearby stood 2 massive 400-barrel oil tanks. Investigators climbed to the top. One by one, they opened the hatches. Inside the thick, black crude oil, floating in separate tanks, were the small bodies of Bella and Celeste. The horror was unthinkable. Their pajamas were soaked in oil, their faces disfigured by the chemical exposure. But there was no doubt these were Shanann's daughters, her babies, the same girls Chris had once kissed goodnight, now dumped into industrial waste like garbage. Weld County investigators wept at the scene. Seasoned officers, men and women who had seen everything, said they had never experienced anything so haunting. Removing the girls took hours. The oil had partially broken down their skin. It was a delicate, painful process, but it had to be done to give them dignity and to preserve evidence of their final moments. Autopsies confirmed what everyone feared. Both girls had died from smothering. Bella's injuries were worse, suggesting she had fought, bit her tongue, struggled to breathe. The autopsy also revealed oil in her lungs. That meant she was still alive when Chris forced her into the tank. He didn't just kill them. He buried them in oil, hoping the crude would destroy their bodies and erase the truth. But the truth had surfaced, and the world was watching. What do you think pushed Chris to dispose of his daughters in such a horrifying way, and why separate tanks? Was it strategy or cruelty? Let's discuss. When news broke that the bodies of Sean and Bella and Celeste had been found, the world recoiled. The quiet suburban story that began with a missing persons alert had become a global horror headline. Cable news, true crime blogs, and social media erupted. The story was everywhere. A husband, pregnant wife, 2 beautiful little girls, murdered, hidden, lied about. Chris Watts's mugshot flashed across every screen in America. His tearful interview from just days before was replayed side by side with the discovery of the bodies. Commentators asked the same haunting question. How could a man do this to his own family? But for Shanann's parents, Frank and Sandra Rzusek, this wasn't a headline. It was the brutal destruction of everything they loved. Frank had always been close to Sean and they spoke almost every day. He adored Bella and Celeste, their laughter, their energy, their joy. The moment investigators told him where they had been found, Frank collapsed. He had trusted Chris. He called him a son. Sandra, who had once welcomed Chris into their home and hearts, said it was like discovering a monster had been living in their family all along. In a public statement, Frank said, "I trusted you to take care of them, not kill them. They were your family, too." Shanann's younger brother, Frankie, took to Facebook in anger. He called Chris a coward, a liar, a man who didn't deserve forgiveness. His posts were raw, emotional, and echoed what millions were feeling: betrayal. As funeral plans began, the family asked for privacy. But the public grief was impossible to escape. Thousands of people gathered online to mourn the loss of 3 lives that should have been protected, not taken. Even complete strangers left flowers outside the Watts home. Pink balloons, toy unicorns, notes written in crayon from other children who had heard the story. Bella and Celeste became symbols of innocence stolen. And Shanann, once criticized by internet trolls for her social media posts, was now honored as a mother who had tried her best to save her marriage and protect her children. As the Rzuseks prepared to bury their daughter, grandchildren, and unborn grandson, Chris Watts sat in jail, silent, cold, and unremorseful. He had confessed only what he had to. The full truth was still locked inside him. But the world had already made up its mind. Chris Watts wasn't a grieving husband. He was a murderer. What would you say to Shanann's parents if you could? Do you believe Chris ever really loved his family? Or was it all a mask? By late August 2018, Weld County prosecutors had everything they needed. The evidence was overwhelming. They had the bodies. They had the confession. They had the lies. And they had the timeline. Now they were preparing to file formal charges. Chris Watts was officially charged with 9 counts. 3 counts of first-degree murder for Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. 2 additional counts for causing the death of a child under 12 while in a position of trust. 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy for the death of baby Nico. Weld County District Attorney Michael Rourke said it plainly. This is the worst kind of crime. A father murdering his entire family. But what shocked everyone, including Shanann's family, was what came next. Chris waived his right to a trial. Just days before jury selection was to begin, Chris's defense team approached prosecutors with a proposal. He would plead guilty to all charges in exchange for removal of the death penalty from the table. Shanann's family was consulted, and though they were torn, they ultimately agreed. They wanted peace. They didn't want to relive the horrors in a drawn-out trial. They didn't want Bella and Celeste's last moments to be played out in court. On November 6, 2018, Chris Watts stood in front of a judge and pleaded guilty to murdering his pregnant wife and 2 daughters. His voice was flat, his answers brief. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as the charges were read one by one, and he said guilty to each. When asked if he understood that he was giving up his right to a trial and appeal, he nodded. When asked if he was entering the plea of his own free will, he said yes. He showed no emotion, no tears, no apologies, no final words. But the DA spoke for everyone in the room when he said, "The evidence showed that the defendant coldly and deliberately ended 4 lives, and tried to discard them like trash. Justice demands he never see the light of day again." The plea deal was accepted. There would be no trial, but there would be sentencing. And what happened in that courtroom next would be the first, and only time Chris Watts heard the raw pain of the lives he destroyed. Do you think Chris should have faced the death penalty? Or was life in prison a more fitting punishment? Let's talk in the comments. November 19th, 2018. The courtroom was silent. Not out of respect, but out of grief. Chris Watts stood shackled, wearing an orange jumpsuit, as Judge Marcelo Kopkow prepared to hand down his sentence. The gallery was full. Shanann's family sat in the front row. Members of the press filled the rest. Everyone was waiting for the moment justice would be spoken aloud. But before the judge could speak, the family had their turn. Frank Rzusek, Shanann's father, rose first. His voice trembled. "I trusted you to take care of them, not kill them. They were your family, your blood. How could you destroy them like that?" He broke down in tears and had to be helped back to his seat. Sandra Rzusek, Shanann's mother, followed. "I didn't want death for you. because that's not my right. But I want you to live every day with what you've done. You took my baby and my grandchildren. I'll never get to hug them again." Then came Frankie Razusek, Shanann's brother. His voice was louder, rawer. "You monster. You had a choice. You chose evil. And now you'll rot in a cell while the world remembers you for what you are. A coward." Chris never looked up. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He simply stood there, hands folded, staring at the table in front of him. When it was over, Judge Kopkow delivered his sentence. 5 life sentences, 3 to be served consecutively, 2 concurrently. No possibility of parole. 48 years for unlawful termination of pregnancy. 36 years for tampering with the bodies. "This is perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime I've handled in my entire career," the judge said. "May God have mercy on your soul, Mr. Watts." Chris was immediately remanded to the Colorado Department of Corrections. But his stay wouldn't last long. Due to threats from other inmates, he was quietly transferred to Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin, where he remains in protective custody to this day. No freedom, no family, no future, just silence, and the weight of 4 lives taken. What part of the sentencing hit you the hardest? The family's words or the judge's final statement? Let's discuss below. Thank you for following this devastating story. If this touched you, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel. We tell stories that deserve to be remembered, no matter how painful. Hit the bell so you never miss a new case. Behind the steel doors of Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, Chris Watts began his life sentence. Alone, hated, and haunted. He was placed in protective custody from day one. Not because he asked, but because the prison system already knew what happens to men who kill their own children. Inmates talk. Inmates judge. And for many, men like Chris are the lowest of the low. His cell was small. His routine quiet. Breakfast at 4 a.m., lockdown by 9. His only visitors were his attorneys and his mother, Cindy Watts. She continued to support him even after the confession. But it wasn't long before the walls of silence began to crack again. In February 2019, just 3 months after sentencing, FBI agents and Colorado Bureau of Investigation officers traveled to Wisconsin to speak with Chris one more time. He had agreed to a 5-hour confession session, no cameras, just audio. What he said stunned even the agents who had heard it all. Chris admitted that his original confession was a lie. Sean and never killed the girls. That part, he said, was just a story to soften the truth and protect his image. Now, sitting in a sterile interview room, he told the real version. He said he strangled Sean and in bed after an argument. Then Bella walked in. She had heard something. She was holding her little blanket and asked, "What's wrong with Mommy?" He told her Mommy wasn't feeling well. Then, he said, he loaded Shanann's body into the truck and took the girls with him. Alive. They rode in the truck for over 45 minutes while their mother's body lay in the back. Bella and Celeste asked questions. He lied. They sang songs. He stayed silent. Then, at the oil site, he smothered Celeste first with her own blanket. Bella watched. Then, Bella said something that would haunt the agents forever. As Chris turned to her next, she whispered, "Daddy, no." Those were her final words. Chris claimed he still sees Bella's face every night in his dreams. The agents asked him why do it, why not divorce, why not leave? Chris had no real answer. He said he was afraid of losing everything, afraid of what people would think, and too deep into his affair with Nickel to go back. But no reason ever made sense. No explanation ever could. He ended the interview with one final statement. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear them." Do you think Chris told the full truth in that final confession? Or is there still more he's hiding? Why take them alive to the oil site? Let's talk in the comments. When the truth about Chris Watts broke, the world didn't just turn its focus on him. It turned on Nickel Kessinger, the woman he'd been secretly dating during the final weeks of Shanann's life. Nickel had no criminal charges against her. She never faced arrest. But her name was dragged through every headline, every YouTube comment section, every dark corner of the internet that wanted someone else to blame. because to the public, Nickel wasn't just a girlfriend. She was a motive. According to the Weld County discovery documents, Chris and Nickel began talking in early June 2018. He told her he was separated. He said divorce was already in motion. He never mentioned Sean and was pregnant. Their relationship escalated quickly. Texts, late-night phone calls, dates, even overnights at his house while Sean and the girls were in North Carolina. They went hiking together. They shared music playlists. They even searched for apartments near each other. Nickel later told police that Chris was charming, thoughtful, and kind. She said he talked about his daughters often, but in a past-tense way, like they were from a life he was leaving behind. When news of Shanann's disappearance hit the media, Nickel panicked. She contacted police herself. In fact, she was the one who tipped off investigators that Chris had been lying. She handed over phone records, texts, and deleted messages, and submitted to multiple long interviews. In one interrogation, Nickel said, "If I had known he was married, with kids, with a pregnant wife, I would have never been involved. But the damage had been done." She became the other woman in one of the most horrific family murder cases in American history. Online, people speculated about her role. Some called her manipulative. Others believed she knew more than she admitted. Her search history, which included wedding dresses and how to prepare for a new relationship, added fuel to the fire. Police found no evidence that Nickel had knowledge of or involvement in the murders. Still, the backlash was relentless. She lost her job. Her face was plastered everywhere. She received death threats. And eventually, she disappeared. According to credible reports, Nickel Kessinger changed her name, entered witness protection, and vanished from public life. Some say she moved out of Colorado. Others believe she's still being monitored. As of today, her whereabouts remain unknown. Do you think Nickel truly had no idea what Chris was capable of? Or did she overlook the warning signs? Would you have trusted him in her shoes? Let's talk. Long before the world knew her name from headlines, Sean and Watts was telling her story. In her own words, she lived much of her life online. Through Facebook posts, live videos, and heartfelt captions, Sean shared the ups and downs of motherhood, marriage, and managing lupus, the autoimmune disease she battled daily. She wasn't pretending to be perfect, but she was trying to be positive. Her posts painted a picture of a woman who loved fiercely, especially her daughters, Bella and Celeste. She called them my whole world. She filled her timeline with photos of family vacations, birthday parties, bedtime snuggles, and mommy and me days. But behind the public smiles, Shanann's private messages began telling a different story. In the final weeks of her life, she confided in friends. She told them Chris had grown distant, cold, unrecognizable. She feared he no longer loved her. She wondered if he was cheating. She even said, "He doesn't kiss me. He doesn't touch me. He barely talks to me." Shanann was also documenting her pregnancy. She shared ultrasound photos. She talked about how excited she was for Nico, their unborn son. She believed this baby might be the fresh start they needed. In one video, she told the camera, "Chris is going to be such a great dad again. I can't wait to watch him hold our son." That video would later haunt viewers who knew what was coming. Investigators later recovered thousands of messages from Shanann's phone, many of them showing a woman fighting to hold her marriage together. She asked Chris if they could go to counseling. She wrote him long messages begging for honesty. In one heartbreaking note, she said, "I miss you. I miss how we used to be. I just want our family back." Chris never responded, but the world has. Since her death, Shanann's videos have been reshared millions of times. Not to sensationalize, but to humanize. People now see not just a victim, but a mother who was doing everything she could to protect the life she built. Her voice didn't disappear. In fact, it became louder than ever. Have you ever watched Shanann's videos? How did it feel seeing her alive, unaware of the tragedy ahead? Let's talk in the comments. They were only 4 and 3 years old. But Bella Marie Watts and Celeste Catherine Watts, Cece, as everyone called her, lit up every room they entered. The world first met them through Shanann's videos. giggling in their princess pajamas, singing songs in the back seat, running to hug their dad at the airport. Bella was the older sister, gentle, cautious, always looking out for Cece. Celeste was bold, full of energy, the wild one with a contagious laugh and endless mischief in her eyes. They were inseparable. They loved painting, dancing in the kitchen, playing with their cousins. Their favorite movie was Frozen. Their favorite song, Let It Go. In one video, Bella stands on the living room floor singing every word. Cece twirls behind her, holding a stuffed unicorn. To Sean and they were everything. She often said Bella was the old soul, sensitive, thoughtful. She noticed when Sean and was tired or sad and would offer a hug or a quiet, "Mommy, are you okay?" Celeste, on the other hand, was her firecracker. She had no filter, no fear. Cece would climb the walls if I let her, Sean and once laughed. They had birthdays coming up. Bella would have turned 5 that December. Sean and had already started planning a joint party. Probably something with glitter, balloons, and cake with Elsa and Anna on top. But those birthdays never came. When Chris killed his daughters, he didn't just take lives, he took futures. First days of kindergarten, ballet recitals, father-daughter dances. He silenced voices that still echo in the minds of everyone who hears this case. The hardest part for many was Bella's final words, whispered as she faced her father. "Daddy, no." She knew. And yet her story and Cece's has refused to fade. People across the world now light candles for them, paint murals, donate toys to children in their names. Their memory has become more than a headline. It's a reminder of how fragile and precious life truly is. In the end, Bella and Celeste didn't die in silence. They are still speaking, through every tear, every tribute, every parent who holds their child a little closer. What moment from Bella and Cece's lives touched you the most? Their songs? Their smiles? Leave your thoughts and keep their memory alive. If this part of the story moved you, please honor Bella and Cece by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Their voices deserve to live on. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next case we cover. After Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 life terms and sent to Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, most assumed he would vanish into the darkness. But something disturbing happened instead. He became famous. Inside his cell, Chris began receiving hundreds of letters, not from victims' advocates or critics, but from people who admired him. Some claimed to feel sorry for him. Others professed love. A few even sent him photos, money, and marriage proposals. One woman wrote, "You're too handsome to have done this. I believe you were pushed." Another said, "You deserve forgiveness. I think you're misunderstood." The letters kept coming, week after week. Some people sent Bible verses. Others shared dreams they claimed to have had about him. Many offered friendship. Some asked for interviews or exclusives, hoping to profit from his story. It was a twisted echo of a phenomenon seen in other notorious cases. Killers like Ted Bundy, Scott Peterson, and Richard Ramirez also attracted attention behind bars. Psychologists call it hybristophilia, a fascination or obsession with people who commit violent crimes. Chris read the letters. He wrote some back. In fact, in 2020, a woman from Wisconsin began exchanging frequent messages with him. Over time, Chris began opening up more than he had with his attorneys. In these letters, he gave graphic, emotional details about the murders. He described Bella's final moments. He spoke about the affair. He blamed dark energy. At one point, he wrote, "I feel like there was something inside me, like I wasn't in control." The letters were eventually leaked to the media, sparking outrage and new trauma for Shanann's family. Why was a man who killed his entire family being given a platform? Why did people still want to hear his side? Weld County DA Michael Rourke later commented, "He wants to be remembered. He wants attention. That's why he talks now." Chris spends 23 hours a day alone in his cell. He attends no group sessions. He has no work assignments. He eats in isolation, showers in isolation, and speaks only to guards or staff. His contact with the outside world comes primarily through letters. But the one thing he hasn't received, is forgiveness from those who matter most. Why do you think some people are drawn to men like Chris Watts? Do they see a victim, or are they just feeding his need for attention? Let's talk. When Sean and Bella, Celeste, and baby Nico were buried, white caskets lined the front of Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Pinehurst, North Carolina. Frank Rzusek could barely speak. His wife, Sandra, held on to a folded photo of Sean, and as if it were the only thing keeping her standing. Frankie, Shanann's younger brother, clenched his fists. There were no words strong enough, no eulogy long enough, just pain deep, raw, and permanent. But even through their grief, the Rzusek family made a choice. They would not let this be the end. They would not let Chris Watts have the final word. In the years since the murders, Shanann's family has worked tirelessly to protect her legacy and her children's. They began by addressing the vicious online rumors that exploded after the case went public. Conspiracy theorists accused Sean of being controlling, manipulative, even abusive, all lies. The Rzuseks were horrified to see Shanann's videos used to twist her image. In 2019, they filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Chris Watts, not for money, but to legally ensure he could never profit from the murders in any way. The judgment was over $6 million. Frank and Sandra also became vocal advocates for domestic violence awareness, particularly the kind that hides behind smiles and social media filters. Frank has spoken in schools. Sandra has counseled women in crisis. They have used their unimaginable loss to try to save other families from suffering the same fate. In a rare interview, Frank said, "We wake up every day with this hole in our hearts. But we keep going for Sean and for the girls, for Nico, because their lives mattered." Shanann's brother, Frankie, has become the most visible online. He posts photos, memories, and reminders that Sean was more than a murder victim. She was a mother, a daughter, a sister, and a fighter. He's also stood up to online hate, calling out channels that exploit the story for views without compassion. Together, the Rzuseks have built a digital wall of protection around their loved ones. They continue to share memories, Bella's jokes, Cece's wild energy, Shanann's resilience. They've created a narrative that doesn't end with Chris. Because while the world remembers the killer, they remember the love. What do you think of the Rzusek family's strength and activism? Should families like theirs speak out or focus on private healing? Share your thoughts. The murders of Sean and Bella, Celeste, and baby Nico didn't just shock the public. They changed how people view relationships, social media, and the masks people wear. Before August 2018, Chris Watts was the picture of an all-American dad. He posed in family photos. He went to school events. He smiled in videos posted by Sean playing with the girls, holding her hand, acting like nothing was wrong. But behind the smile was a storm building. And that's what haunted the world the most. This case forced people to ask uncomfortable questions. How could a man murder his entire family without anyone seeing it coming? Can someone fake love that convincingly? Were there signs? And did we all miss them? In the aftermath, experts in psychology and criminology began pointing to a pattern. Men like Chris Watts are not typical killers. They are family annihilators, often quiet, well-liked, and seemingly stable. But behind closed doors, they carry the weight of control, pressure, and suppressed rage. Many of them don't snap. They plan. They script their behavior. They lie to everyone, including themselves. What made the Watts case unique was how public it became. Shanann's life was documented online. Every pregnancy update, every family video, every smile. But beneath it all, she was privately texting friends about a crumbling marriage. The disconnect between what the world saw and what was really happening stunned millions. People began rethinking social media itself. Can you really know someone based on their posts? How often are smiles hiding sadness? Even police departments across the U.S. began reviewing domestic violence protocols, especially in cases with no prior history of physical abuse. They started asking, can emotional and psychological control be just as dangerous? The case also inspired documentaries, books, and podcasts, not out of morbid curiosity, but because people needed to understand how a man like Chris Watts could exist. And more importantly, how to stop the next one. For Sean and Bella, Celeste and Nico, it's too late. But for someone else in another house behind another smile, this story might be the warning they need. What lessons do you think this case taught us as a society? Can we ever truly know what happens behind closed doors? Let's talk in the comments. It's been years since the Watts family murders, but the world hasn't moved on. Not really. The case has become one of the most widely viewed, shared, and discussed true crime stories in modern history. Continues to trend on YouTube. It's dissected on Reddit. Podcasts revisit it regularly. And Netflix's documentary American Murder, The Family Next Door, brought it to global audiences in a way no one expected. That documentary used only raw footage, police body cams, home videos, text messages, and Shanann's own voice. There was no narration, no interviews, just the chilling timeline of a family coming undone, told through digital footprints and silent stares. For many, that's what made it unbearable. You see Shanann smiling, you hear Bella singing, you watch Chris lying, and you already know how it ends. The documentary sparked new waves of heartbreak and questions. Why did Chris keep lying when the truth was obvious? Why didn't anyone see what was coming? And how could a man go from father to killer in a matter of hours? On Reddit and YouTube, viewers share their theories and emotions daily. Some talk about Shanann's strength. Others try to understand Chris's coldness. Many simply grieve. For two little girls, an unborn baby, and a mother who tried her best. Even law enforcement officers have said this case stayed with them like no other. Weld County investigators, CBI agents, and FBI profilers who worked the case have spoken about the trauma of uncovering the truth, especially after finding the bodies. What makes it unforgettable is not just the brutality, but the contrast. The normal-looking house, the sweet social media posts, the birthday videos, the little girls singing. It's the realization that sometimes the most horrific monsters live behind the quietest doors. And that's why the story won't go away. Because in every neighborhood, on every street, someone looks at their neighbor a little differently now. Why do you think this story continues to haunt the public more than others? Is it the footage, the lies, or the fact that it happened in plain sight? Let's talk in the comments. If you've stayed with this story this far, thank you. Please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel. We cover real stories that deserve to be remembered and understood. Hit the bell so you don't miss what's next. Chris Watts doesn't look like a monster. That's what makes him terrifying. When the news broke, so many people, friends, co-workers, even neighbors, said the same thing. He seemed so normal. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, no loud outbursts or documented abuse. He worked a steady job, mowed the lawn, smiled in photos. But under the surface, something was brewing. Something dangerous. Forensic psychologists call it covert narcissism, a quiet form of narcissistic personality where the person doesn't seek power openly, but still craves control, admiration, and escape from responsibility. Chris Watts didn't want to face a divorce. He didn't want the shame of being exposed. He didn't want to share custody. And he didn't want to deal with the fallout of ending his marriage while expecting a third child. So, like other men who fit the profile of a family annihilator, he chose destruction over consequences. According to profiler Dr. Casey Jordan, men like Chris aren't necessarily insane. They're calculated, selfish. They view their families not as people, but as obstacles to their new lives. Chris wanted freedom, a fresh start, a clean slate with his mistress, Nicole. But he couldn't imagine dealing with lawyers, child support, or public failure. So he did what experts call the erasure method. He killed his wife, then his children, then tried to pretend none of it ever happened. This behavior isn't new, but the Watts case exposed it in full view. It became a case study in seminars, law schools, and forensic training. Experts pointed to his detachment, his lack of emotion, and the way he rehearsed grief in interviews. Even his confessions were hollow. In multiple versions of his story, he changed details to make himself seem less evil. He showed no consistent remorse, only self-pity. In one letter from prison, he wrote, "I wish I could go back. "I wish none of this happened." But he never said, "I wish they were still alive." There's a difference, and forensic experts saw it clearly. To this day, psychologists continue to analyze the Watts case not just for what it revealed, but for what it failed to warn. Because Chris didn't break down. He broke away. And only after it was too late did anyone see the man he really was. Do you believe people like Chris Watts can be spotted early? Or are some killers just too good at hiding? What signs, if any, do you think were missed? Let's talk below. After the sentencing, after the interviews, after the documentaries and headlines faded, what remained were 4 names: Shannon, Bella, Celeste, Nico. And those names, even in death, refused to disappear. Across the world, thousands of people who had never met the Watts family began leaving tributes. Outside their home in Frederick, Colorado, the sidewalk became a shrine. Teddy bears, pink balloons, drawings, candles, handwritten notes, all carefully placed under the trees in front of the house where they once lived. People came to cry, to pray, to remember. Shanann's family, though devastated, kept sharing memories online. They posted old birthday videos, clips of Bella singing, photos of Cece's wild hair and big smile, and ultrasound snapshots of baby Nico, the boy who never got to be born, but is remembered as if he was. In 2019, the town of Pinehurst, North Carolina, Shanann's hometown, hosted a memorial walk in her honor. Participants wore purple, her favorite color, and released butterflies. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't a statement. It was just grief. Moving forward, people around the world began doing the same. On Facebook, tribute pages were created. On YouTube, creators lit candles on camera. Children in classrooms wrote poems. Some people even got tattoos, not of names, but of sunflowers, unicorns, or little angels, symbols that represented each child's spirit. And while the media eventually moved on, the Razusek family did not. They built a small garden in their backyard, with wind chimes for each grandchild. When the breeze blows, the soft notes ring out, as if Bella and Cece are laughing again. They speak to Sean and in their prayers. They leave Christmas ornaments for Nico. For them, grief has no ending, but love has no limit. As of today, the Watts house sits empty, a hollow shell on a quiet street. Some say it's haunted. Others say it should be torn down. But those who stop to leave flowers don't look at the house. They look at the names carved in stone and remember the joy that once lived there. Because while Chris Watts tried to bury a family, the world dug them back up in memory, in love, and in legacy. If you could leave one message for Sean and Bella, Cece, or baby Nico, what would it be? Let's fill this comment section with their names, not his. This wasn't just a murder case. It was a mirror. The story of Chris Watts didn't just end in the courtroom or the funeral home. It continued to ripple through how society talks about family violence, social media, and the illusion of perfect lives. It forced people to ask deeper questions. How many families are smiling on the outside while falling apart inside? How many women are quietly begging for help through text messages, just like Sean? And how many men are carrying rage behind polite smiles and grocery store trips? The Watts case became one of the most covered stories in modern true crime history, but it also sparked a shift in the genre itself. Creators started telling stories with more empathy, more care for victims, and less focus on the killers. Shanann's voice, once mocked by online trolls for being too much or too public, became a symbol of strength. A reminder that documenting your life isn't a flaw. It's a way to be heard, especially when people stop listening. Police departments also began reviewing how they respond to emotional abuse, not just physical violence. Many survivors pointed to the story and said, "This could have been me." Domestic violence isn't always bruises. Sometimes it's distance, silence, control. And by the time it becomes visible, it's already too late. Shanann's story has now been shared in documentaries, books, university lectures, and survivor support groups. Her texts are read aloud in domestic violence awareness events. Her Facebook videos are played in workshops for digital safety and relationship red flags. Even schools have quietly adjusted how they talk about home life. Teachers who watched the case unfold say they now look closer when a child grows suddenly quiet, like Bella, or when a mother seems to be carrying the weight of the world alone, like Sean. And this wasn't just a tragedy. It became a turning point, one that continues to teach, to warn, and to remind us that evil doesn't always knock loudly. Sometimes it lives right down the hall wearing a wedding ring. And while Sean and Bella, Celeste, and Nico are gone, their story remains, a lesson, a warning, a light in the darkest places. How has this case changed the way you look at relationships, safety, or even social media? Let's have a real conversation about prevention and awareness. This story began with a quiet neighborhood and ended with 4 lives stolen. Sean and Watts was 34, a lupus warrior, a mother who never stopped trying. She built her business from the ground up, cheered on other women, and loved her children with everything she had. Bella Marie Watts was just 4, sweet, soft-spoken. She loved to sing and hug her mom's belly to talk to baby Nico. She was protective of her little sister and wore her heart on her sleeve. Celeste Catherine Watts, wild and full of fire, was only 3. She ran before she walked, laughed louder than anyone in the room. Her favorite thing was being picked up and spun in circles by her dad, the same man who took her life. And Nico Lee Watts, unborn but never unloved. A boy who never got a chance to cry, to crawl, to be held, but whose name is etched beside his mother's forever. We have spoken their names 24 times now, and yet, somehow it never feels like enough, because this wasn't just a crime. It was an erasure of an entire future. Birthdays, milestones, hugs, bedtime stories. Sean and should be posting school photos. Bella and Cece should be dancing to Frozen. Nico should be taking his first steps. Instead, we have silence. But in that silence, something powerful was born. A movement of people who said, no more. No more turning away when someone says they feel unsafe. No more excusing sudden changes in a partner's behavior. No more assuming that a smiling photo means everything is fine. This story will live on, not because of who Chris Watts was, but because of who Sean and Bella, Celeste, and Nico were, and should still be. Their names have become more than tragedy. They have become a warning, a lesson, a legacy. And through stories like this, told with care, truth, and respect, we ensure they are never forgotten. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. In memory of Sean and Bella, Celeste, and baby Nico. Gone but not forgotten. What will you carry with you from this story? A moment, a message, a name? Leave it in the comments and let's remember them together. If this story touched you, please honor their memory by liking this video, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, subscribing to the channel, and let their names echo louder than the man who silenced them. And hit the bell so you never miss the stories that matter.